It was a calm morning, the kind of morning where the sun had just begun to warm the streets and the air smelled faintly of dew and fresh grass. The neighborhood was slowly waking up. Birds chirped softly in the trees, and from some houses the smell of breakfast drifted out into the street. Everything seemed ordinary, peaceful, and nothing hinted at the small storm that was about to unfold on a school bus just a few blocks away. The school bus waited at the corner, its yellow paint gleaming under the early sunlight. Children were slowly gathering, backpacks swinging on their shoulders, lunchboxes in hand. Some were chatting with their friends, laughing loudly while others shuffled quietly along the sidewalk. Among the children, there was one little girl who seemed different from the others. She stayed a few steps back, her small hand clutching the strap of her backpack, her eyes darting around nervously. She was not like the other kids who ran up excitedly to board the bus. She hesitated at the edge of the pavement, biting her lip and looking down at the ground. Her hair, tied in a simple ponytail, bounced slightly as she moved, but her movements were jittery, almost cautious. The bus driver, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a friendly smile, noticed her. He had seen children like this before, shy, quiet, sometimes nervous. "Good morning." He called out warmly as the children climbed aboard. "How's everyone today?" Some of the children waved or shouted back cheerfully, but the little girl simply nodded, barely making eye contact. The driver tried not to worry. After all, not every child was loud or outgoing. He had learned over the years that a quiet child could be just as happy and just as excited as the ones who screamed their greetings. Still, something about her caught his attention. Maybe it was the slight trembling of her hands or the way her eyes looked past him, as if she were seeing something far away, something troubling. The bus began to fill with the sounds of chatter and laughter. Friends caught up with each other, swapping stories about homework or last night's cartoon. The little girl took a seat near the middle of the bus, squeezing herself between two empty seats as if trying to disappear into the cushion. She stared out the window, her small hands pressed against the glass, watching the streets pass by. Her movements were hesitant, careful, like she was afraid that if she moved too much, something might happen. At first, the driver focused on maneuvering the bus through the morning traffic. The roads were getting busier now, parents driving children to school, cars honking, the faint hum of engines filling the air. Yet he couldn't fully ignore the little girl. There was a tension in the air, subtle but undeniable, and it made him glance back a few times to see if she was all right. She seemed lost in her thoughts, but not in the usual way children do when daydreaming. This was different. There was worry in her eyes, a heaviness that made her appear older than her age. She fidgeted with the straps of her backpack, tugging them nervously, glancing at the other kids who were laughing and talking, but never really joining in. Her lips trembled slightly, and for a moment, the driver thought he saw a single tear escape from her eye, but she quickly wiped it away. The bus moved along the quiet streets, picking up children from various stops. Each time a new child climbed aboard, the little girl seemed to shrink slightly in her seat, her shoulders tensing. She hugged her backpack closer, her eyes flicking toward the door every time it opened, as if she feared someone might be following her. The driver's unease grew. He had been on this route for years, seen all kinds of behavior from kids, but something about this morning felt off. There was a weight in the air, an invisible tension that he couldn't quite name. As the bus approached the next stop, the driver saw a group of children waiting. One of them waved, calling out cheerfully, while the others jostled each other playfully. The little girl's eyes, however, stayed fixed on the window, on the scenery outside. Her breathing became slightly uneven, and she gripped her seat tightly, knuckles white. The driver knew he had to do something, but he also knew that children sometimes simply had their quiet mornings. When the bus stopped and the new children boarded, there was suddenly a brief moment of chaos. Backpacks collided, shoes shuffled, and laughter mingled with small squeals of excitement. In that moment, the little girl flinched as if startled by something invisible. She looked around frantically, her eyes wide, searching for someone or something she could not name. The driver leaned forward, calling her name gently. "Are you okay, sweetie?" he asked softly, his voice full of concern. She did not answer immediately. Her lips quivered, and she looked away, her gaze falling toward the floor. The other children were now seated, oblivious to the tension in the middle of the bus. The driver reached out slightly, his hand hovering near her seat. He didn't want to startle her further. Finally, she whispered, barely audible, a single word that made him straighten in his seat. Her voice was small but filled with a kind of urgency that was impossible to ignore. He leaned in closer, trying to catch every syllable. She repeated it just a little louder, and this time he caught the fear in her tone. Something was clearly wrong. He realized that this was not just a moment of shyness or nervousness. This was something deeper, something troubling that he couldn't yet understand. The bus continued moving, but the atmosphere had shifted. The laughter and chatter from the other children seemed distant now, muffled by the weight of the little girl's fear. The driver's hands gripped the wheel tighter, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror where she sat, trembling slightly. He had seen fear in children before, but this was different. It was urgent, raw, and he felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He tried to speak again, gently, reassuringly. "It's okay. You're safe here. Can you tell me what's wrong?" Her lips parted and she seemed to struggle with the words. She opened her mouth, closed it, and then opened it again, as if forcing herself to speak despite a fear that held her tight. The bus rolled on, every stop passing, the streets moving past in a blur. But nothing else mattered now except the small, frightened girl in the middle of the bus. Her eyes met his for the first time fully, and he saw the fear reflected in them. Not just a passing worry, but something that had happened, something she had seen or felt that made her small frame tremble uncontrollably. He felt a surge of protectiveness, a sudden understanding that this child needed help, needed someone to listen, to act. And then, without warning, she did something no one expected. She rose from her seat, small feet padding quickly along the aisle. Her backpack bounced against her back as she ran. Not like children normally run on a bus, but with a desperate speed born of panic. Her little voice, crying and gasping, pierced the usual morning sounds of the bus. The driver's heart leapt. He slammed his hand on the brake slightly to stop the bus smoothly, his eyes wide as he saw her sprint toward him. Other children turned their heads in surprise, some startled, others unsure what to do. The bus had gone from a normal morning ride to a scene of urgent tension in a matter of seconds. She reached him, hands trembling, tears streaking her small face. And then, in a voice that barely rose above a whisper, she said something, a few simple words, just 4, but words that would change the entire morning. Words that made the bus driver's face go pale, and his heart pound in sudden fear and recognition. The bus driver's hands shook slightly on the steering wheel as he stared down at the little girl. Her small, tear-streaked face was full of desperation, and her eyes were wide with fear. The other children watched in confusion, their chatter fading into a tense silence. Nobody on the bus had ever seen her act like this before. Something in her voice, even though she had only said a few words, made the driver feel a chill run down his spine. The 4 words echoed in his mind. "He's in the street." For a split second he froze. His mind raced, trying to understand what she meant. A boy? A stranger? A car? The words were so simple, yet they carried a weight he could not ignore. He realized instantly that this was not just a scared child making a mistake. This was a warning, a cry for help. The little girl trembled as she clutched his arm, her small hands shaking uncontrollably. He's in the street," she repeated, her voice breaking, each word laced with urgency. "I saw him. He needs help." The driver's heart pounded. He could see the fear in her eyes, and he knew she was telling the truth. He glanced in the rearview mirror at the other children who were now silent, their usual energy replaced by uncertainty. Their eyes darted between the driver and the little girl, sensing that something serious was happening. Without a moment's hesitation, the driver shouted for the children to stay seated. "Everyone stay calm. Sit down and stay in your seats." His voice was firm but calm, trying to keep the atmosphere under control. The little girl pointed out the window with a trembling finger, her knuckles white. The driver leaned slightly forward to see, and a sinking feeling hit his stomach. Across the street near the curb, a small figure struggled, appearing unsteady and in danger. It was difficult to make out exactly what was happening at first. Morning shadows and the angle of the bus made it hard. But something was clearly wrong. The driver's instincts kicked in. Years of driving, years of watching over children, all led to this moment. He needed to act fast, but he also had to keep the bus and the children safe. His mind raced as he tried to plan his next move. Should he get off the bus immediately? Call for help? Stop traffic? Every second felt stretched, heavy with urgency. The little girl clung to his arm, whispering over and over, "Please. He's in the street. Someone help him." Her small voice, though soft, carried a weight that made the driver's chest tighten. He could see the fear in her face, the urgency in her eyes, and the innocence of a child, facing a moment far beyond her understanding. He quickly unbuckled his seatbelt and knelt down beside her. "You did the right thing," he said gently, trying to calm her. "Can you tell me exactly where he is? Is he hurt?" The little girl nodded, tears spilling freely now. Yes. He's hurt. He fell and he can't get up." The driver's mind went into overdrive. He knew he had to act fast. He opened the door of the bus slightly, peering out cautiously. The street outside was busy now. Cars had started to move, unaware of the small emergency unfolding. He could see a man lying near the curb, his leg bent at an awkward angle, clearly unable to move. Panic surged in the driver's chest. He quickly grabbed his radio and called for help, keeping his voice calm despite the adrenaline pumping through him. "This is the bus on Main Street. We have an emergency. A person is hurt in the street near the corner. Please send assistance immediately." The little girl stayed close, her small hand gripping his sleeve. She was shaking now, her body trembling from the intensity of the moment. The driver gently rubbed her back, speaking softly to reassure her. "You did very well. You told me, and now we can help him. Everything will be okay." Meanwhile, the children on the bus watched silently. Some whispered to each other, asking questions in hushed tones. "Is he okay? Why is she crying?" The driver didn't answer them immediately. His focus was entirely on the little girl and the person outside. He knew the children would pick up on his fear if he let it show, and he wanted to remain calm to keep them safe. Moments felt like hours as he carefully maneuvered the bus to block the lane closest to the injured man. This would prevent cars from getting too close while he and the little girl attended to him. He then stepped out cautiously, the little girl following closely, still clinging to him. Her small size and trembling body tugged at his heart. She had just been the voice that alerted him to danger, and now she was right by his side, brave despite her fear. The man in the street groaned softly. His eyes fluttered open and he tried to move, but a sharp cry of pain stopped him. The driver knelt beside him immediately, checking to make sure he was conscious and breathing. "It's okay, sir," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "Help is on the way. Can you stay still for me?" The little girl peeked from behind the driver, her eyes wide with worry. I saw him fall," she said softly. "I told you." Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of her courage. She had noticed the danger when no one else had, and her quick thinking had prevented what could have been a disaster. The sound of approaching sirens finally broke through the tension. The little girl's face relaxed slightly, a mixture of relief and continued worry washing over her. The driver guided her back to the bus, keeping her calm while emergency responders rushed to the man's side. Once the paramedics took over, the driver helped the little girl back onto the bus. The children stared in awe, realizing that something serious had happened and that their quiet classmate had been part of the reason it was resolved so quickly. The driver sat down beside her, giving her a small, reassuring smile. "You were very brave," he said gently. "You told me exactly what happened, and because of you, help came quickly." "You did an amazing job." The little girl sniffled, still trembling slightly, but a small smile began to appear. She nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and pride. The bus began moving again, but the energy inside was different. It was calmer, quieter, but filled with a sense of awe and respect for the courage she had shown. For the rest of the ride, the driver kept glancing at her in the mirror. He realized that children often see things adults don't, notice small details that can be life-saving. Today, her courage and honesty had made all the difference. By the time the bus reached the next stop, the little girl had calmed further, though she still held his sleeve lightly. The driver felt a deep sense of respect for her, and a quiet pride in the role he played in keeping everyone safe. He knew that this morning, the ordinary school bus ride had turned into something unforgettable. Even the other children seemed to sense the weight of what had happened. They whispered softly among themselves, their usual energy subdued. Some even looked at the little girl with newfound admiration, realizing that courage comes in many forms, sometimes even in the smallest voices. The bus drove on, streets passing by in the early morning light, but the driver couldn't shake the image of the little girl's brave eyes, her trembling hands, and the 4 simple words that had changed everything. "He's in the street." It was a moment he would never forget, a reminder that sometimes even the smallest voice can carry the loudest warning. The bus rolled on through the quiet streets, but the air inside felt heavy with unspoken tension. The little girl sat close to the driver, her small hand barely letting go of his sleeve. She sniffled quietly, eyes still wide, haunted by what she had seen earlier. The driver kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his mind replaying the moment she had shouted those 4 words. "He's in the street." Even now, the words echoed in his mind. They had been so simple, so ordinary, yet the urgency in her voice had made him stop everything and act immediately. It was strange how children sometimes saw things adults missed, noticed details that could save a life. Today, she had been the one to notice danger, the one to act when it mattered most. The other children on the bus were unusually quiet. Normally, they would chatter, laugh, or play small games on the ride to school. But now they were subdued, sensing the seriousness of the moment even if they didn't fully understand it. Some stared out the window, trying to ignore the tension, while others peeked at the little girl with a mixture of curiosity and awe. The driver tried to bring some calm back to the bus. "Okay, everyone," he said gently but firmly. "Let's sit back and get ready for school. Everything is fine now." A few children mumbled in response, but their eyes remained on the little girl. They had never seen her act like this before. She had always been quiet, sometimes shy, but now she had shown something powerful, a courage they couldn't quite understand. The little girl finally spoke, her voice soft and trembling. He could have been hit," she said, her lips quivering. I saw him before anyone else did. I didn't want anyone to get hurt." The driver felt a lump in his throat. She was only a child, yet she had carried the weight of someone's safety on her small shoulders. He reached over and gently patted her hand. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "You helped save him. You were very brave." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they weren't just from fear. They were tears of relief, tears of pride. She had done something important, something that mattered. And yet the driver could see a shadow of lingering worry in her expression. She was still processing what had happened, still replaying it in her mind. He decided to ask her more gently about what she had seen. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" he asked softly. "I want to understand so I can make sure you feel safe." She nodded, taking a deep breath. I was walking to the corner," she said slowly, "and I saw him. He was trying to cross, but he slipped. I thought he might get hurt really badly, so I ran here and told you." The driver's heart tightened. The image of the man lying in the street struggling and unable to move stayed in his mind. He realized how close it had been, how quickly things could have gone wrong. And he understood now why the little girl had been so afraid, so desperate. She had been carrying that fear all morning, and it had driven her to act. "You did very well," he said, squeezing her hand gently. "You noticed danger, and you told me right away. That's the bravest thing a person can do, no matter how big or small they are." She sniffled again, trying to smile, but her lips trembled. I didn't know what to do," she admitted softly. "I was scared. I thought maybe he could. I don't know." The driver nodded understandingly. "It's okay," he said reassuringly. "Being scared is normal. What's important is that you didn't ignore it, you acted, and that's what saved him." For the next few minutes, the bus continued in silence. The children had grown quiet, some whispering softly to themselves, others staring out the windows, lost in thought. They were realizing that bravery didn't always come from loud voices or bold actions. Sometimes it came from noticing the small things, acting when no one else does, and having the courage to speak up even when you're afraid. The little girl slowly relaxed a bit, but the driver could tell she was still shaken. He decided to keep talking to her, to help her process what had happened. "Do you want to tell me more about what you saw?" he asked gently. She nodded. He was trying to cross the street," she repeated. "He didn't see the cars. He fell, and I knew he couldn't get up. I didn't know how to help him by myself, so I ran to you. I was afraid no one would see him." The driver's chest tightened at her words. She had felt responsible, even though she was just a little girl. She had been carrying the weight of someone else's safety, and that was an enormous burden for a child. He wanted to reassure her, to let her know that she had done everything right. "You did exactly what you should have done," he said softly. "You told me, and that's what mattered. You didn't have to do it alone. You asked for help, and that's the smartest thing you could have done." The little girl's eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded slowly. I just didn't want him to get hurt," she whispered. "I couldn't stop thinking about it." The driver smiled gently. "I know, and that's why you're so brave. You cared enough to act. That's a wonderful thing." For a moment, the bus was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the engine and the occasional creak of the seats as it moved down the road. The driver glanced in the mirror again, seeing the little girl sitting quietly, her small hands folded in her lap, still trembling slightly, but calmer than before. He realized something important in that moment. Children often notice things adults overlook. They see the small details, they react quickly, and sometimes their courage can save lives. Today, that had been true in the most dramatic way possible. The bus approached the next stop, and the driver prepared to let the children off. The little girl stayed close, still holding his sleeve lightly. He could see the mix of relief and lingering fear in her expression. She had acted bravely, but she was still processing the intensity of what had happened. As the bus stopped, other parents and children gathered, chatting and laughing as usual. But the little girl's quiet bravery had left a lasting impression. The driver knew that today would be remembered, not just by him, but by everyone on that bus, especially the little girl. He gently guided her to her stop, kneeling down to her level. "You were amazing today," he said softly. "Do you understand that? You were amazing. You helped someone in real danger, and you did it with courage and honesty. That's something very special." The little girl looked up at him, her eyes wide, a small smile forming through the lingering tears. I just wanted to help," she whispered. "And you did," the driver said firmly. "You really did." She nodded slowly, finally feeling a small sense of relief. The weight on her small shoulders had been heavy, but knowing that she had acted correctly, that she had saved someone, gave her a quiet pride. She would remember this morning for the rest of her life, not because of fear, but because of the courage she had shown. The driver stood, watching her walk safely toward her home. His heart felt full, both with relief that everything had ended, and admiration for the bravery of a small child who had spoken up when it mattered most. As he started the bus again, picking up the remaining children and continuing the route, he knew this morning had been different. It wasn't just a bus ride anymore. It was a lesson in courage, observation, and the quiet power of a child's voice. Even the other children, though they hadn't fully understood the danger, had witnessed something remarkable. They had seen how bravery could come in many forms, and how even the smallest actions could have a huge impact. And the little girl, sitting quietly now, still holding his sleeve, understood it too. She had faced fear, spoken out, and helped someone in need. She had discovered that courage doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means you act even when you are. The bus drove slowly through the streets, the little girl still sitting close to the driver, her hand barely letting go of his sleeve. Her small body trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the lingering fear and adrenaline of the morning. The driver kept stealing glances at her in the mirror, thinking about how quickly a normal day had turned into something unforgettable. Even after the paramedics had taken the injured man away, the memory of the sight, the way he had fallen, the helplessness in his movements kept replaying in his mind. He could feel the little girl's fear, a quiet weight that was still pressing on her shoulders. She had acted bravely, but he knew children often internalized these experiences, carrying the memory of danger long after it was over. "Are you feeling a little better now?" he asked gently, trying to break the silence. She nodded slowly, eyes still wide but calmer. "A little," she said softly. "I'm still scared, though. What if it happens again?" The driver smiled faintly, understanding perfectly. "I know, it's normal to feel scared. But remember, you helped someone today. You did exactly the right thing, and that counts for a lot." You were brave. The little girl looked down at her hands, fidgeting with the strap of her backpack. I didn't know what to do at first. I was scared and I thought maybe no one would believe me, she admitted. You acted immediately, the driver said, his voice calm but firm. Even when you were scared, you spoke up. That's what matters. You saved someone and you can be proud of that. The bus moved forward slowly, the morning sun casting long shadows over the streets. The driver's mind wandered briefly to what could have happened if the little girl hadn't noticed the man in the street. He shivered slightly. It was a stark reminder of how fragile life could be, and how small actions could make all the difference. Meanwhile, the little girl began to talk more, her voice still soft but steadier. I saw him fall, she said. He tried to get up, but he couldn't. I didn't know how to help him by myself. I thought, maybe if I told you, you could do something. The driver nodded, impressed by her clarity. Exactly. That's why you did the right thing. You didn't try to handle it alone. You asked for help, and that's the smartest thing you could have done. She nodded again, a small sense of relief washing over her. She had been carrying the weight of responsibility all morning, and finally, someone was acknowledging her effort. It was more than just comfort. It was validation, the recognition that her actions mattered. The bus approached another stop, and the driver slowed it to a halt. Children stepped off, waving goodbye to their friends, chatting happily. The little girl stayed seated, her small frame hunched slightly as if she were still protecting herself from the morning's tension. The driver decided to talk more openly about what had happened, hoping to help her process it. Do you want to tell me more about what you saw? He asked. It might help to say it out loud. She nodded, taking a deep breath. I was walking to the corner when I saw him. He was trying to cross the street, and I think he didn't notice the cars. He slipped, and I saw him hit the ground. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to help, but I was scared. The driver listened carefully, his eyes soft. It's okay to be scared, he said. What matters is that you acted even though you were afraid. You did something very important. You saved him. Tears filled the little girl's eyes again, but this time they were mixed with relief and pride. I didn't want anyone to get hurt, she whispered. And you didn't let that happen, the driver said firmly. You made sure he got help. You did everything right. The bus continued its route, but the driver felt a quiet tension still hanging in the air. The little girl had done something incredible, but the weight of the experience was still heavy on her young mind. He decided to continue the conversation gently, hoping to guide her through understanding her own courage. Do you know why your actions were so important? He asked softly. It's because you noticed something that adults might have missed. You paid attention and you acted quickly. That's why people like you make such a difference. The little girl nodded slowly, tears still glistening in her eyes. I wanted to help, she said again. And you did, the driver said, giving her a reassuring smile. You were brave and your quick thinking saved someone. That's something very special. For the rest of the ride, the bus was quieter than usual. The other children seemed to sense the gravity of what had happened, whispering softly to each other. Their curiosity mingled with awe. They had seen a small child act in a moment of crisis, and it left a strong impression on them. The driver glanced in the mirror at the little girl, her small frame still tense, but gradually relaxing. He felt a deep sense of respect for her courage, and a quiet pride in the role he had played in keeping her and the others safe. Today, the ordinary school bus ride had turned into something unforgettable. He decided to prepare her for the rest of the day, knowing that children often carried such experiences quietly. You're safe now, he said gently. The people who needed help have it. You don't have to worry about it anymore. It's okay to relax a little. The little girl nodded slowly, a small smile forming on her lips. She still trembled slightly, but the knowledge that she had done the right thing gave her strength. She had faced fear, acted bravely, and helped someone in need. The driver thought about how often adults overlooked the insights children had. They saw things adults might miss, reacted quickly, and sometimes their courage saved lives. Today had been one of those times. As the bus moved on, the little girl finally leaned back in her seat, her small hands resting on her lap. The tension in her shoulders slowly eased, and a quiet sense of pride replaced some of the lingering fear. The driver felt a quiet relief, too. He had witnessed something remarkable, A small child acting bravely in a moment of danger, and the outcome had been life-saving. It was a reminder of the importance of listening, observing, and acting quickly when it mattered most. Even the other children seemed changed. They whispered softly among themselves, a sense of awe in their voices. They had seen courage in action, and they would remember it for a long time. The little girl looked out the window, the sunlight warming her face. She felt a mix of emotions, fear, relief, and pride, but above all, she felt a quiet strength. She had acted when it mattered, and that gave her a new confidence. The driver kept glancing at her, smiling softly. He knew this morning had been more than just a bus ride. It had been a lesson in courage, awareness, and the quiet power of a child's voice. And as they continued down the streets, he felt a deep respect for the little girl, who had turned fear into action, and in doing so, had made a real difference in someone's life. The bus continued its route through the morning streets, but the atmosphere inside had changed completely. The earlier chaos and fear were gone, replaced with a quiet sense of reflection. The little girl sat close to the driver, her small hands folded in her lap, still holding onto the sleeve of his jacket lightly. Though she was calmer now, her eyes reflected the weight of what she had experienced. The driver stole glances at her in the rearview mirror, thinking about how quickly a normal day had turned into something unforgettable. It wasn't just a bus ride anymore. It was a story of courage, quick thinking, and the unexpected impact one small voice could have. The little girl finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Do you think he's okay?" she asked, her eyes searching the driver's face. "I believe so," he said gently. "The paramedics took him and they know how to help him. You made sure he got the help he needed." "That's very important." She nodded, still processing everything. "I was so scared," she admitted. "I didn't know what to do at first. But I had to say something. I couldn't just watch." The driver smiled warmly. "And that's exactly why you were brave. Being scared is normal. Acting even when you're scared, that's true courage. You saved someone today, and that's something very special." The bus rolled on, picking up more children and stopping at familiar corners. The other children on the bus glanced at the little girl occasionally, whispers passing between them. They had witnessed something remarkable, a quiet, seemingly ordinary child showing incredible courage. Some of them whispered softly, trying to understand what had happened, while others just stared, impressed and a little in awe. The little girl leaned back in her seat, staring out the window. The morning sunlight cast gentle shadows across her face, and she felt a quiet sense of relief. The fear was still there, lingering like a shadow, but it was no longer overwhelming. She had acted when it mattered, and now she knew she could trust herself in difficult situations. The driver's mind wandered back to the moment when she had run toward him, the words "he's in the street" echoing in his memory. He realized how fragile life could be, how quickly things could change, and how small actions could have enormous consequences. He also felt a deep respect for the little girl's bravery, understanding that children often notice things adults might overlook. As the bus neared the school, the driver slowed and guided it to the drop-off area. The children began to gather their belongings, chatting softly now, but with an unusual sense of seriousness. They had learned something without even being taught. Courage comes in many forms, and even the smallest actions can make a difference. The little girl stayed in her seat until the driver knelt beside her. "You were amazing today," he said softly. "Do you understand that? You were brave and you helped someone in real danger. That's something very important." She looked up at him, her eyes wide, a small smile forming through the lingering tears. I just wanted to help," she whispered. "And you did," the driver said firmly. "You made sure someone got help. That's true courage." The little girl finally got off the bus, her small feet stepping onto the pavement carefully. She turned to the driver one last time, giving him a shy smile. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm glad I ran to you." "You did the right thing," the driver replied, smiling warmly. "You saved a life today. Never forget that." As she walked toward her home, the driver felt a quiet pride and relief. Today had been extraordinary, not because of the danger itself, but because of how a small child had acted when it mattered most. He reflected on the lessons he had witnessed firsthand, the importance of paying attention, listening, and acting quickly even in the face of fear. The bus started its return route, picking up the remaining children and carrying them to school, but the driver couldn't shake the image of the little girl's brave face, her trembling hands, and the 4 simple words that had changed the morning. He's in the street. Those words had been the spark that set everything in motion, the signal that led to safety and help. Even the other children, though they didn't fully understand the danger, had been affected. They had seen courage in action, and it had left a lasting impression. Quietly, they carried a new respect for the little girl, and perhaps a deeper understanding of responsibility and empathy. The driver reflected further as he drove on, realizing that life often presents moments that require courage in unexpected ways. Sometimes it is the smallest voice, the most hesitant action, that can make the greatest difference. Today, a child had taught him that lesson in the most powerful way. By the time the bus reached its final stop, the streets were busy with morning activity, but the driver felt a calm settle over him. The little girl's bravery had prevented something terrible from happening, and the day had taken on a sense of purpose and meaning far beyond a normal bus ride. He watched the children leave, chatting quietly, smiling occasionally, but carrying with them the quiet knowledge of what had happened that morning, and he knew that the little girl would never forget this day either. The day when fear became courage, and a single voice changed everything. As the bus emptied and the last of the children walked safely toward their classrooms, the driver leaned back in his seat for a moment, letting out a long, quiet breath. He felt gratitude for the little girl, for the quick arrival of help, and for the reminder that courage could come from anywhere, even the smallest, most unexpected place. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he knew that this story, this ordinary morning turned extraordinary, would stay with him forever. The image of the little girl running toward him, the fear and urgency in her voice, and the 4 simple words that had turned a potential tragedy into a story of heroism and care, it would never leave him. The driver started the engine again, ready to continue his day, but with a quiet sense of awe and respect for the courage he had witnessed. It was a morning that began like any other but had ended with a powerful reminder that bravery, even in the smallest hands, could save lives and change the world around us.